The sun rose gently over Charleston, casting a warm golden glow across St. James Cathedral, one of the most prestigious churches in the city. It was a picture-perfect Saturday morning, the kind that made every detail seem like it had been scripted by the heavens. Inside the cathedral, fresh lilies perfumed the air. Soft organ music floated beneath the soaring vaulted ceiling, and the pews were packed with the most distinguished guests. Politicians, celebrities, business tycoons, they had all come to witness the union of Rachel Carter and David Miller, two individuals whose names had graced society columns for months. Rachel was the beloved daughter of Henry Carter, a media mogul and philanthropist, and David, her childhood friend recently returned from Europe, was the supposed fairy tale groom. Everything looked impeccable down to the last flower petal, and yet amidst all this splendor, one man stood quietly uneasy. Pastor Michael Lawson had presided over hundreds of ceremonies in his 23 years serving the cathedral. He was respected for his discernment, admired for his composure, and loved for the calm strength he carried with him like a cloak. That morning he stood in his flowing white robe, trimmed in navy blue, holding a small leather-bound Bible and surveying the scene with his usual patience. But something tugged at him. It wasn't anything loud or obvious. It was more like a whisper, a ripple beneath still waters. His eyes were drawn to David, who stood tall at the altar in an immaculate, tailored suit. From a distance, the groom appeared the very image of confidence, flashing polite smiles and nodding at guests. But up close, Pastor Michael saw the truth in the way David adjusted his cufflinks over and over, the way he straightened his tie with nervous fingers, the way his eyes flicked constantly toward the entrance, like a man expecting something or someone. The pastor had seen nervous grooms before. It was normal to tremble before such a momentous commitment, but this felt different. It wasn't the fluttering excitement of a man about to marry the woman he loved. It was tighter, more frantic. There was a kind of urgency in David's body language, a hunted look in his eyes that didn't align with joy. Still, Pastor Michael said nothing. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, muttering a prayer beneath his breath. "Lord," he whispered, "if there is anything hidden here today, bring it to light. Let no lie be blessed at your altar." He opened his eyes again and watched Rachel's father escort guests to their seats, his laughter booming through the hall. As the final notes of the prelude began to play, and the crowd hushed in anticipation, Pastor Michael glanced once more at David, whose smile now appeared frozen too wide, almost strained. Then the bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle, their dresses a soft champagne color that shimmered under the golden chandeliers. Flower girls giggled as they tossed rose petals, and the entire room stood in silence as the great wooden doors opened to reveal Rachel Carter, radiant in a white satin gown embroidered with pearls. She moved with grace and pride, her father holding her arm, both of them smiling like all their dreams had finally come true. Gasps of admiration echoed softly through the room. Cameras flashed, but Pastor Michael's heart beat heavier with each step she took. He watched the couple's eyes meet, Rachel beaming with unmistakable joy, David smiling back, though it seemed his feet shifted slightly, as though he were preparing to run. Pastor Michael's spirit stirred again. He had long learned to trust the quiet warnings of his soul. Something here was not right. And so, as Rachel and David joined hands before him, he did not see a love story unfolding. He saw the beginning of a battle between truth and illusion. He tightened his grip on the Bible and raised his voice for the opening prayer, eyes locked not on the happy couple, but on the trembling hands of a groom with too much to hide. The ceremony proceeded with practiced elegance, but Pastor Michael's mind remained sharply alert. He read every line of the liturgy with the grace expected of him. But beneath his calm surface, he scanned each gesture, every exchanged glance. When he invited the congregation to sit and bowed his head for the scripture reading, he whispered once more to the heavens, "Lord, if the truth must come, let it come now, before vows are made, before hearts are broken beyond repair." He had no evidence, only instinct, but in a room full of smiles and silence, sometimes it was only the heart that could hear what was wrong. And on that glittering Charleston morning, Pastor Michael Lawson's heart was screaming softly, "Be ready." Pastor Michael Lawson had always believed that love was not just about vows and rings, but about truth. That belief guided his practice of premarital counseling, a sacred tradition at St. James Cathedral. Every couple preparing to wed under the ornate arches of the historic church was required to sit down for at least 3 sessions. It was not just about discussing wedding logistics, but about aligning heart-surfacing values and ensuring both individuals understood what they were entering into. Rachel Carter and David Miller had been no exception. Rachel attended the sessions with enthusiasm and laughter, often blushing when David spoke about their shared future. But David, well, he had been polite, even charming. But something in his responses always made Pastor Michael pause. It began with small inconsistencies. During one casual conversation, Pastor Michael asked David what he remembered most fondly about growing up in Charleston. David responded confidently, "Oh, definitely, the Magnolia Parade." "We had every September," Rachel smiled beside him, nodding, perhaps swept up in the nostalgia, but Pastor Michael felt his heart jolt. There was no such parade in September. The Magnolia Festival, a beloved Charleston tradition, had always been held in early June. For anyone raised in Charleston, that was common knowledge, just like knowing which local park had the best fireflies in July, or where kids lined up for popsicles after church in the summer. David's slip could have been nerves or simple confusion, but when Pastor Michael gently mentioned the festival's usual date, David chuckled and said, "Oh, right, of course must have been another one. I'm thinking of." That might have been the end of it, had there not been more. When the time came to review the wedding ceremony script, David requested something unexpected. "Pastor," he said casually, "could we maybe skip the part where you ask if anyone objects? You know, the speak now or forever, hold your peace line. I've heard horror stories of people ruining weddings with outbursts." Rachel had raised an eyebrow and laughed. "What? David? You hiding a secret wife in the audience?" she teased. David forced a chuckle. "Of course not, babe. I just don't want anyone making a scene. It's supposed to be our moment, not a circus." Pastor Michael noted the tension in David's voice. He had officiated countless weddings and could count on one hand the number of grooms who even commented on that part, let alone ask to remove it. He smiled softly and said, "David, tradition exists for a reason. It's not just a formality, it's a moment of truth, and if there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear." David said nothing more, but Pastor Michael noticed the flicker of discomfort that crossed his face. 2 days before the ceremony, while the church staff prepared for the wedding rehearsal, Pastor Michael was in his study reviewing his notes when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," he called, expecting perhaps a volunteer or a florist. Instead, an elderly man stepped inside, moving slowly, leaning heavily on a cane. He wore a worn tweed jacket, and his eyes, though tired, burned with urgency. "Pastor," he said, voice low, "my name is Charles Miller. I was David's uncle." The words struck like a cold wind. Pastor Michael gestured for him to sit, offering him a glass of water. "What brings you here, Mr. Miller?" The old man sighed deeply and said, "That young man marrying Rachel Carter. He's not my nephew." The room seemed to still. Pastor Michael, ever composed, leaned in slightly. "You're saying that man is not David Miller?" Charles nodded gravely. "He looks like him. Yes, speaks like him, even walks like him. But he is not my David. I haven't seen David in many years. He left for Europe after his parents passed, and we lost touch. But I know my family, and something about this doesn't sit right." Pastor Michael listened intently. Mr. Miller continued, "I saw his face in the wedding announcement. I tried to convince myself I was just old, confused. But there's a way you can know for sure." He paused, trembling. Slightly, David was born with a birthmark, small, shaped like a star just behind his right ear. It was always there. If that man does not have it, he is not who he claims to be. Pastor Michael sat back, stunned by the gravity of the claim. It was no longer a matter of nerves or forgotten traditions. This was something far more serious, possibly a case of deception at the deepest level. He thanked Mr. Miller sincerely assuring him he would handle the matter with great care. After the old man left, Pastor Michael remained in his office, staring at the closed door. The weight of his responsibility felt heavier than ever. In his heart, he prayed for wisdom, clarity, and timing. He knew the next steps had to be taken with delicacy and that he would need proof before confronting anyone. But the quiet suspicion that had been growing like a shadow over the past few weeks was now undeniable. Something about David Miller didn't add up, and Pastor Michael was determined to uncover the truth before it was too late. The following day, at the final rehearsal, Pastor Michael studied David's every movement, his every word. Rachel remained oblivious, joyful, excited about table arrangements and seating charts. But David? He laughed a little too loudly, interrupted conversations he wasn't part of, and seemed overly interested in whether everything was locked in for the ceremony. When Rachel briefly left the room to take a call, Pastor Michael approached David gently. "Tell me," he said casually, "where did you and Rachel used to play when you were children?" David hesitated, then said, "Oh, we spent lots of time at the old fountain in Hampton Park. Loved that place." Pastor Michael nodded, but inside he knew something was off again. The fountain at Hampton Park had only been built 5 years ago. David and Rachel had supposedly parted ways long before that. Each new inconsistency added weight to the pastor's growing conviction the man standing before him might be an imposter, hiding behind a smile, and that truth, one way or another, was about to surface. The sanctuary of St. James Cathedral had never felt more sacred or more fragile. As Pastor Michael Lawson led the congregation through the solemn words of the wedding ceremony, the room held its breath. Rachel Carter stood glowing beside the man she believed to be David Miller, her childhood friend turned fiancé, her hands gently wrapped in his. The moment had arrived that so many had longed to witness, the union of love, loyalty, and destiny. The choir's voices softened, and the crowd of Charleston's elite politicians, moguls, and family friends sat reverently still. Pastor Michael's voice rang steady as he reached a pivotal point in the ceremony. "If anyone here knows a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." It was a line often met with nervous chuckles or hushed silence, but not today. A sharp scraping of a chair echoed through the cathedral, and all eyes turned. From the third row, an elderly man rose slowly. Charles Miller. His frame shook, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. He could no longer keep hidden. Rachel's smile faltered. The groom's hands twitched at her fingertips, and then in a voice lined with pain and fire, Charles pointed at the groom and declared, "That man is not my nephew." Gasps erupted across the pews. Confused murmurs rose like a wave crashing against marble. Rachel turned, stunned. "What are you saying?" she whispered. David, or the man claiming to be, stood frozen, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly ajar. Pastor Michael stepped forward, raising a calm hand to still the crowd, his own heart thundering in his chest, remaining composed. Pastor Michael addressed the groom directly. "David," he said evenly, "for the peace of this congregation and the honor of this house, please show us the birthmark. Mr. Miller speaks of the star-shaped mark behind your right ear." The man hesitated, sweat beginning to form along his brow. His hand moved slowly to the back of his neck, fingers hovering in the air. "Pastor," he stammered, "I had it removed years ago. I was self-conscious about it. There's nothing to show now." The explanation felt brittle, rehearsed. A hush fell once again, heavier than before. Someone near the back muttered, "Who removes a birthmark from behind the ear?" Others simply shook their heads. Pastor Michael took another step closer, his voice firm but kind. "Even with removal, there would be a scar. Please show us." The man visibly trembled now, and with reluctant fingers pulled back his collar and tilted his head. There was nothing. No mark, no scar, only smooth, untouched skin. The cathedral exploded in whispers. Rachel took a step back, her hand still gently resting in his now trembled. She looked at him with wide, betrayed eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, barely audible. The man's posture collapsed, shoulders sagging. He lowered his gaze to the floor. Pastor Michael spoke softly. "The truth, son. Now." For a long, drawn-out moment, the man said nothing. Then, in a broken voice, he whispered, "My name is Marcus Green." The name, unknown to all in the room, carried the weight of a thunderclap. "I'm not David. I never was." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as he began his confession, his voice cracking under the weight of lies, finally laid bare. "I was David's roommate," he said. "We studied together abroad. I came from nothing. My parents died when I was young. I worked nights and slept on floors just to stay in school." His voice quivered as he glanced at Rachel. "David talked about you all the time, said you were the one person who made him believe in love again. Then he got sick, and before he died, he asked me to stay connected to the people he loved." He paused, trying to control his breathing. "At first, I just wanted to keep his memory alive. But then, I saw your photos, read your conversations, and I made a choice. I became him." Gasps swept across the church like wind through dry leaves. Rachel clutched her veil, tears streaming silently. Marcus continued, "I reached out to you as David. You believed it, and for a while I did too, but it wasn't just about love. It was about survival, about finally living a life that didn't hurt." His voice hardened slightly. "I thought, if I could marry you, if I could become part of your world, I'd finally escape everything I've fought against. No more hunger, no more shame." The confession echoed through the cathedral, staining the walls of what had moments ago been a chapel of joy. Pastor Michael stepped between Rachel and Marcus with a quiet authority. His eyes held no rage, only sorrow. "And what of her heart?" he asked softly. "What of the family? The trust, the sacred vows you stood ready to make?" Marcus had no answer. He simply fell to his knees, sobbing, the weight of deception crashing down on him. Guests watched in disbelief, their faces a mix of pity and outrage. Two security officers stationed at the back by Pastor Michael's earlier request moved quietly down the aisle. Before Marcus could run, they took him gently by the arms and led him away. The man who pretended to be David Miller disappeared through the cathedral doors, leaving behind a shattered bride, a stunned congregation, and the lingering echo of a truth too long buried. In the days following the disastrous wedding, Charleston buzzed with disbelief. The city that had dressed up for a fairy tale union now mourned a public betrayal, and Rachel Carter found herself at the center of it all. Newspapers ran headlines like "Groom unmasked at altar" and "Heiress, duped by imposter fiancé." Talk shows debated how such a deception could unfold under the nose of one of the city's most respected families. Social media was ablaze with opinions, some sympathetic, others scathing. But while the world spiraled into gossip and speculation, Rachel chose stillness. She did not fly off to Europe or hide in the Carter estate. Instead, she stayed in her family home, walked her garden barefoot in the early mornings, and allowed herself to grieve without shame. Her grief wasn't loud. There were no dramatic breakdowns or interviews. But each quiet tear she shed, each memory she unpacked of the man she thought she loved, helped her take one more step toward healing her father. Henry Carter, a man known for controlling every narrative, tried to shield her at first. But Rachel gently asked him to let her face the world on her own terms. "This happened to me," she said softly. "I want to decide what comes next." The strength she showed stunned everyone, including those who had only known her as a polished socialite. What the world saw as tragedy, Rachel was beginning to shape into purpose. And a few weeks after the failed wedding, she made her first public appearance, not at a gala, but at a local women's shelter, delivering a quiet talk on the danger of emotional fraud. It was there, amid rows of women who had known betrayal in different forms, that Rachel first spoke the words that would define her new mission. "I ignored the signs," she confessed, "because I wanted so badly to believe in love. But love that demands blindness is not love, it's control." The message resonated. Stories poured in from women across the country. stories of catfishing, false identities, emotional manipulation. Rachel realized that what happened to her wasn't rare, it was just rarely talked about. And so the Hope Rising Foundation was born. Through workshops, school programs, and survivor support networks, the foundation aimed to teach emotional awareness, digital literacy, and most importantly, the value of trusting one's intuition. Rachel wasn't just rebuilding her life, she was building a movement. Meanwhile, Pastor Michael Lawson became something of a folk hero. His image, tall, serene Bible in hand, was printed on the front page of major news outlets with captions like, "The pastor who stopped a wedding to save a soul." But he shied away from the attention. To him, it had never been about glory. It was about listening to the quiet voice of the Spirit when everything on the outside seemed perfect. "God speaks in whispers," he said during a Sunday sermon shortly after the wedding, and discernment is not suspicion. It is protection wrapped in love. His congregation grew almost overnight. People from across state lines traveled to St. James Cathedral to hear him speak, to seek counsel, and to thank him for what he had done for Rachel. He greeted them all the same way, with humility and gentle reminders that it wasn't his wisdom that saved the day, but God's grace. The story continued to ripple outward. Universities hosted forums on the psychology of deception. Relationship experts published books on the importance of self-trust. Talk show hosts invited Rachel on to share her story, but she declined, preferring instead to focus on grassroots change. What mattered to her now wasn't fame, but impact. And quietly across coffee shops and classrooms, people began to ask different questions. Not how could she not know, but how can we create a world where people feel safe enough to tell the truth? The conversation had shifted from blame to understanding, from shame to growth. Rachel's circle also began to change. Some friends, uncomfortable with her newfound purpose, drifted away, but others leaned in. Her mother, usually reserved, began volunteering at Hope Rising. Her younger cousin started a podcast for teens on online safety. Even Henry Carter, long known for building empires, donated $500,000 to fund research on digital identity fraud. Healing, it seemed, was not a single act, but a collective unfolding one that Rachel had unknowingly sparked with her courage at the altar. Through it all, Rachel never claimed to be fearless. She admitted to sleepless nights, to sudden tears in grocery stores, to moments when trust still felt like a bridge she didn't know how to cross. But she also spoke about joy, about standing in the rain without flinching, about laughing again, slowly, authentically. And one day, while addressing a group of college women, she said something that would become the tagline of her foundation. "If someone must lie to be loved, they are not loving you. They are using you, and you deserve better." The room fell silent, not because of shock, but because every woman in that space understood Rachel Carter. The woman once fooled by a man with no name had become a lighthouse, not because she had never broken, but because she had. And still she chose light. The seasons shifted quietly over Charleston, and with them so did Rachel Carter's life. It had been 6 months since the wedding, that never was 6 months since the truth unraveled at the altar and left her standing in the rubble of a dream. But time, as always, did its sacred work. The media storm faded, the whispers grew distant, and in their place came something far gentler: peace. Rachel filled her days with purpose. The Hope Rising Foundation was thriving, her workshops well attended, her team expanding. But while her professional life blossomed, her heart remained still, a space she had quietly closed, not out of bitterness, but for healing. That is until a quiet moment in the most unlikely of places began to write the first line of a new chapter. It was a warm spring afternoon when Rachel visited Oakview Children's Hospital to deliver educational kits from her foundation. She had dressed simply: jeans, sneakers, a soft white blouse, no makeup, no photographers, no entourage. She liked it that way now. As she balanced a heavy box of books and tablets, it slipped slightly from her grasp, teetering on the edge of falling. "Let me help you with that," a gentle voice said. She looked up, surprised to see a young man in scrubs and a volunteer badge step forward, his hands reaching for the box. He was tall, with warm brown eyes and rough hands that moved with quiet certainty. "Thanks," she said, brushing hair from her face. "I'm Rachel Jason," he replied, smiling without recognition. "I'm just here a few days a week, mostly restocking supplies, running books to the kids. You're doing a good thing, by the way." She nodded slightly, caught off guard by the simplicity of the interaction. Over the next hour, they talked while unloading supplies. Jason didn't ask about her last name. He didn't mention the wedding, the headlines, or her family's wealth. He asked about the books, what age group they were for, what kinds of stories the kids liked. She asked him about his work, his dreams. He shared that he was studying part-time to become a nurse, paying his way through school with side jobs. He didn't speak in sound bites or flattery. He spoke with quiet conviction and soft laughter. And something in Rachel stirred not a rush of infatuation, but a flicker of recognition. She had met many people since her story became public. Some treated her like a wounded icon, others like a symbol of scandal. Jason, however, simply treated her like a person. They saw each other again the following week, this time by coincidence. She was back to speak with the hospital director, and he was cleaning up the activity room. "We should probably stop meeting like this," he joked as she entered. "Or maybe keep meeting like this," she replied before realizing how easily the words had come. Slowly over coffees, afternoon walks, and small shared tasks, something grew between them. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic. It wasn't built on secrets or make-believe. It was rooted in honesty, in gentle exchanges and mutual respect. Jason never tried to impress her. Rachel never felt the need to pretend. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't playing a role. She was just Rachel, and he was just Jason. And somehow that was more than enough. When Rachel eventually told Pastor Michael about Jason, she expected teasing or caution. Instead, he simply smiled, his eyes warm with approval. "You know," he said as they sat together in his quiet office, "real love rarely makes noise. It doesn't show up in grand entrances or whispered promises under chandeliers. It arrives softly. It waits. It listens. It builds slowly on truth." Rachel nodded, tears forming gently in her eyes. "I didn't think I'd feel this again," she admitted. "Not after everything. Not after Marcus Pastor Michael placed a hand over hers." "Pain doesn't mean you were foolish," he said gently. "It means you were brave enough to try. And now you're wise enough to know what's real." Weeks turned into months, and Rachel and Jason grew, in step with the changing seasons. They kept things private, not out of secrecy, but because they understood the beauty of something not yet burdened by public eyes. Jason attended one of her talks quietly, sitting in the back, beaming with pride. Rachel visited the hospital more often, not just to deliver books, but to visit him on his lunch breaks. Sometimes they sat on a bench under the blooming dogwood trees and spoke of nothing important. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Their silence was never awkward. It was sacred. And in those moments, Rachel began to understand something she never had before: love, when it is honest, does not rush to declare itself. It simply shows up and stays. There was no dramatic proposal, no viral moment, just a quiet dinner. One evening in Jason's tiny apartment where he cooked pasta and overcooked the sauce. They laughed, and as she helped him clean up, she turned and said, "I don't know where this is going, but I know I feel safe here." Jason looked at her with soft certainty and replied, "So do I," and that was enough for now. Rachel Carter had once stood before hundreds in a gown worth thousands, ready to marry a man she never truly knew. Now, standing barefoot on a kitchen floor beside a man who had nothing to gain from her name, she felt something far richer. She felt real. She felt seen. And above all, she felt free. It was not the ending she had once imagined, but it was the beginning she had always needed. If this story moved you or made you reflect on love, truth, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful narratives that uncover the heart of human experience. We bring you real stories, emotional journeys, and unforgettable lessons from moments that changed lives forever. Hit the like button, share with someone who needs to hear this, and join our growing community that believes in the quiet strength of truth and the beauty of second chances. Your voice matters. Drop a comment below and let us know how this story touched you.